Woche in der April von Hey Tavis. I'd like to, I'm starting a minute too early. It's, as you see here on the front sheet, the first slide, that we're asking for Shlema for my nephew, Chaim Yisrael Ben Bluma Yaakovs. Apparently his condition has deteriorated, and this matter is critical, so if you can join me in saying Kapitel Chof, although it's at night, it's a critical moment, so join me please in saying Kapitel for him for Shlema. Nam Natziach Mizvah David, Yancha Adonai B'Yom Sora, Yisagel Hashem Elohei Yaakov, Yishlach Ezracha Mikeitz, Omitzir Misadecha, Yizke Kol Mechisecha, Ve'loschi Rafnesela, Yitem Lachochel Vavecha, V'chol Atzosecha Yemale, Niranim B'Shrosecha, Hashem Elohim Nidgel, Yemale Adonai Kol Mishalisecha, Ati Yodati, V'Ishi Adonai Meshicha, Ya'anehu Mishmei Kodshei, V'Gloris Yeshi Yeminai, Eile Varechem, V'Eile Basusim, V'Anachnu B'Shem Adonai Elohim Nazker. Hey, Makoro over Nafolo, Vanachno Kamno, Vanis Eidod, Adonai Hishio Hamelach Yanenu Yim Korenu. Chaim. I'd like to dedicate the Succos of this shiur tonight. It should be for him for Shlema. Let's go to in the spirit of Hey Tavis. So, what you have in front of you is from the first print of the Alter Rebbe Siddur, which we know of, presumed to be from Shkolov Top Kuf Samach Gimel. It's one of those svarim which are Aschal to the Geula. This is in the Schneerson collection in Mari Neroshe in Moscow. But Baruch Hashem, at least we have the access to it. So, just pointing out that someone asked me this week, how do you pronounce it? Lishtamish Bohein or Lishtamish Bohen? And you're going to see in different Chabad Sidurim, sometimes it has Bohein and sometimes it has Bohem. And, well, this is the first print. Now, someone, a mishpocha of mine, he lives in Toronto, so he sent me an interesting ha'ara. Alpi, in Kabbalah, not only are the Nekudas significant, also there's a gematria of the Nekudas. And the gematria of Nekudas works like this. Every dot is worth 10, like a good, and every line is worth 6, like a Vov. So now a comet, which is a line and a dot, has a value of 16. So if you take a look, it's a Seirei and a comet, so that gives it a value of 36. Okay, Haneus and Halocho, you've got 36 candles over Hanukkah. And there's also Lishtamish Bohen, and they are, one mustn't use them for mundane things. So you have here the gematria of 36. In the Nekudas, in the Nikud of the word Bohen, you have a gematria of 36. Okay, nice ha'ara. Let's go on then to another ha'ara, just looking at the word Dvir. Now, the word Dvir comes up particularly in Hanukkah because we have in Mois Tzur, we have the words Dvir Kodshe Heviani, and so although in Chabad we don't say Mois Tzur, but Memegvissen from Deswegen, doesn't harm to know. And then we have also in Al Hanissim, so what exactly is the Dvir? So the Dvir is mentioned in Melochim, in the building of the Beis HaMikdash, and Melochim Aleph, as you see there, and also it's mentioned in Tilim, Nossi Yodel Dvir Kodshecha, we have in Hoshan as Dvir HaMutzna. The way the Pashtonim learn is the Al Derech HaPshat, this refers to the Kodesh HaKadoshim. As we know, that's called, in English, it's called the Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting. That's where Moshe Rabbeinu would hear the Dibur, the words coming out from between the Kruvim. And therefore the Kodesh HaKadoshim has got this name of Dvir. That's one Pshat. And then we have in the Tosefta, in Yuma, it turns out that the Dvir actually refers to the passage between the Kodesh and the Kodesh Kadoshim, otherwise known as the Amot Raksim. So in the Gemara in Yuma, the Dvir is referring to that. It's the name of the passage before the Kodesh HaKadoshim. In Mois Tzur, my impression is Dvir Kodshe Heviani, is the context there is that he means he brought us to Eretz Yisrael. Now, coming back to Ritzei, which you say every day, 3 times a day, 4 times a day on Shabbos, etc. Restore the avodah to the Dvir. And so begs the question, what does it mean, restore the avodah to the Dvir? If the Dvir refers to the overall Beis HaMikdash, we understand. Even if you say the Dvir refers to the Kodesh HaKadoshim, I can also understand. Because it means, okay, and there's a order of the Rebbe, that the overall Beis HaMikdash is all kind of, the focus is because of the Hashros and Shechina, the residence of the divine presence in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So the entire Mikdash, kind of, this is the point of focus. But if it means the passage, so then I'm being bothered by this question of Derech HaPshat, Pshat and Halacha. So I mentioned here that Rabbi Shlomo Kluger wants to say it refers that the tefillos should go through the avodah Dvir Beisecha, that the tefillos should go through, but that doesn't really fit in the pshat of the bracha. So my thought about this is the following: before you go into a very holy place, you pause for a moment. You're entering a holy place, a special place, whether you're chassid before going into Yechidus, whether you're going to the Oyel, whatever it be. But before you enter, like a shiur is meant to have an extra, like a little corridor, the ulam in the Beis HaMikdash, the foyer. There was nothing done in the foyer. But before you barge into the house, you stop for a moment in the foyer and you think and you contemplate where you're entering. And so that's my thoughts about the Hosheva Avodah Dvir Beisecha. There's an avodah of hachana for davening. Before you start davening, stop for a moment and contemplate where you're going into a holy place. Let's go on to the next question which came up. I often act as the Baal Korei in our show. My father was a professional Baal Korei, and I just kind of model my way in. So Rabbi Singer is asking, what's the correctness of Bohen or Bohen? Well, here you have the first print of the Alter Rebbe's Siddur, and I would say Bohen, especially now you've got nice gematria to support it. So I would keep to Bohen. Okay, so I was Baal Korei on Sunday, and I hadn't looked it over. And Sunday was, if I'm not mistaken, was the 3rd day of Hanukkah. So I started reading Bayom Hasheni, thinking that the Shlishi will have the Bayom Hashlishi. And I was getting confused between Succos and Hanukkah. So here's an interesting situation. When it comes to Succos, we have the last Aliyah will always be the correct Aliyah, the correct day, Bayom or V, etc., of the korbanos of that day. When it comes to Chanukah, so the number for the day is the first Aliyah. So I was intrigued. Why is it that on Succos the first Aliyah is not necessarily reflecting the number of days of Succos it is, and it's the last one which is the most correct, although in Chutz La'aretz we do 2 because of Seket Yoma. Why is it in Chanukah it's the other way around, that the first one is the correct, is the accurate one, and the extra is second? And just before going further, as you may know, that in Eretz Yisrael they follow the minig largely, apart from Chabad. Chabad itself, Succos, it depends which Chabad shiur you're going to, but when it comes to Chanukah, largely necessarily follow the Mikeitz Yisrael, they just do the same thing over and over. But coming back, so what's the difference? What's the difference between Chanukah and Succos? A very big difference. Sukkos is the korbanos hayom. Chanukah is not the korbanos hayom. Chanukah is actually what we're reading. We're reading the dedication of the Mishkan, which happened on Rosh Chodesh through Yud Beis Nisan. It happens to be because the Beis Hamikdash was dedicated again in the times of Chashmonaim. Therefore, we read it Chanukah HaMizbeach, but it was rededicated. And then there's Medrash that the Mishkan was already prepared already in Kislev, and it was delayed till Chanukah, till Nisan, whatever it may be. But certainly the Yemei HaNesiyim, which we're reading, is not linked to specific days of Chanukah. It makes up the question perhaps even more. The thing is like this: on Sukkos, if you just start saying each day the number for that day, it come towards the end of Sukkos on the 6th or the 7th day, you say Bayom HaShishim or Bayom HaShvi, and what will you do for the Shlishi? You won't have it. So you're going to have to start on Bayom HaChamishi. So let's take a look over here. Yom Daled Chalamoyed, you start Bayom HaChamishi. Hoshana Rabbi, you start Bayom HaChamishi. There's no other way you're going to do it. You're going to have to start not on the correct day in order to make. I'm not talking about this Midrash Fardo. I'm talking about the Midrash Gaznim, that we do each day a different one, and only the fourth one. So, therefore, you have to not. The first Aliyah cannot always be the reflection of the right day of the week of Sukkot. The last day of the last Aliyah is the one that is the extra. It's the Chaviv, because it's the extra one. This is how the Lush says. So the last day, the last Aliyah, fourth Aliyah, is the extra, and therefore, if one of them is going to be given the privilege of being loyal, reflecting the number of the day, it was given to the fourth Aliyah, which is the bonus for Chalamoid. So Chalamoid Sukkot, so Sukkos, it's the bonus Aliyah, which is the correct one. Chanukah, one of the Mephoshim asked the following: why is it on Chanukah we read the same thing twice? Why don't we do on the second day of Chanukah, we'll do Bayom HaSheni Bayom HaShlishi, and on the third day of Chanukah we'll do Bayom HaRevi Bayom HaChamishi, and then on the fourth day of Chanukah we'll do Bayom HaShishi Bayom HaShvi, and so on. It doesn't work out totally, but the thing is, it will really throw us off. If we're going to, on the fourth day of Hanukkah, have to start reading Bayom HaShvi or something, it's going to be very, very confusing. And for the sake of simplicity, because, not everyone necessarily has a calendar and everything worked out, for the sake of simplicity, Chazal would prevail that the Nossi is going to be the beginning of the Kriya, is going to be reflective of the day. I just have perhaps a nice remez, perhaps. Hanukkah, the emphasis connected Yom Hanif Nossi. So therefore, the first day has to be reflecting of which day we're holding. Sukkos is Korei HaChag, and Martin B'Holchim. So perhaps we're not so worried. Forget the last one is the focus. Okay. Which brings us to the next question. This is a real question that on the fourth day of Hanukkah, the Baal Korei starts with Lein Bayom HaChamishi. Lein Bayom HaChamishi, very polite congregation. We only corrected after we finished the first Aliyah. So what do you do now? So on Hanukkah, if you read the wrong day, what do you do now? Do you have to repeat? And I have a sefer called shiur, and I've mentioned before, all the mistakes that you could think of, which you can imagine would happen during davening. And he addresses this, and he says, he brings from Sforim, and actually it's written in Mr. Brewer, he brings it from Becky Yosef, from an earlier sefer, Master Moshe. You don't have to, it's okay. But the evidence, it's okay. And the word is like this. It's not like Sukkos. On Chanukah, it's not Korbanos Hayoim. And if you read, you're talking about something which happened in Nisan. So if you read Bayom HaChamishi, so if you did, what I would say therefore is, you read Bayom HaChamishi, for Rishon, call Shani, finish off that piece, and then do Shlish, you go back to the correct date. Should I try to put on a microphone? Is everyone finding it a bit, the sound a bit difficult? Sound is okay, or sound schwach, or sound off? You okay?
Schwach.
Okay, I'll put on the. It out. Any improvement?
Yeah, it's better.
Okay. All right. So far we've said that Hanukkah, if you do the wrong one, because it's all, it's in any case it's a bit remote. Just a bit interesting, counterintuitive to what we just said. But then comes the next question: what would happen on Succos if you made a mistake on Succos? You read the wrong Aliyah, the wrong korban. So I don't know what happens in Eretz Yisrael, but in Chutz La'aretz, also you can relax. You're doing 3 Aliyos, 4 Aliyos. Even if the first Aliyah was the wrong one for the day, but the next Aliyah might get it right. So just bear in mind, so long as the Aliyos for that reading will include, one of the 4 Aliyos will include the korbanos of that day, you're good. Because it doesn't have to be all of them correct for the Aliyahs of that day, for the they're not all the Aliyah, the korban of that day. So it's nicht gefährlich if you make it a mistake, which I found that quite an interesting piece of information. Okay, let's go on to another question. Nothing to do with Hanukkah. Does a Kallo have to hear the Sheva Brochos? So we have a by Chasana. Then you have during the week, you have the meal, you have a Sheva Brochos. How important is it for the Kallo to be present? So the answer is, it's on the level of minhag. It's not a level of shiur. Even if the Kallo's, some say even if the Kallo's not there altogether, but if she's not in the room, you could still say Sheva Brochos. The minhag is that the Kallo comes and sits nearby and hears the Sheva Brochos. Let's move on to the next point. Okay. So here, this is I got a question from the United States. So ready peeled garlic. What's the story with that? So there's a concept called ruach ra, and it's mentioned in Gemara many times. This is ruach ra. This causes ruach ra. So this is the interesting thing is a lot of it is not brought in Shulchan Aruch. But the Alter Rebbe, and because it's not brought in Shulchan Aruch, some poskim say it's not binding in the halacha. But the Alter Rebbe has got in his Chesed Mishpat, he's got a section called Hilchos Shmiras Guf Nefesh about Tashkis, and included in that is these 3 items which I mentioned in Gemara Nida that they will invite a ruach ra. So they are garlic, onions, and eggs. So let's read that inside. One should not eat garlic, a peeled garlic, or botzel koluf, or peeled onion, or beitza klufa, or a peeled egg, she'ovar alehem laila, which was left peeled overnight. Because they will somehow invite an evil spirit. Even if they are they're wrapped and sealed, so also the worry of ruach ra still applies. If the root was left, that's the hair, the fibers at the head of the garlic or the onion, or a little bit of the shell of the egg, mutarim. So this is a quote from the Gemara, and the Alter Rebbe brings it. What's the practice? The Meiser. I actually was on Friday. I was sitting in the Beis Ha'ira on 140 Stamford Hill, and I got such a shaila. A woman was asking about putting the sliced onion, and then scattering spices, and then she wanted to put fish, or I don't remember exactly the detail, and then to leave it like this. So the general practice, which is followed in Haredi circles, is if there has been an added salt or added some kind of conditioning, that it's not just a raw food, it's actually been modified, it's been enhanced somehow, that's enough to say that it's already processed and no worries about ruach ra. So for example, when it comes to eggs, the bakeries use a lot of, they don't necessarily all stand there and crack eggs. They buy already produced eggs and have bottles full of yolks, or bottles full of the white of eggs, and they use it ready-made. So when it's used for Haredi hechsher, they will insist that they have to, in the factory, they add a little bit of salt to the liquid egg. In that way, it's considered, it's not just a plain egg shaval of laila, it's already processed somewhat, and that takes away the problem. That's why I told this woman also that if she adds some spices, she said she's adding spices to the onions, so then that's enough to take off the worry of ruach ra. There's a discussion whether when it talks about a shelled egg, beitza klufa, is it talking about a raw egg in liquid form, therefore, or is it talking about a boiled egg? But there's opinions this way and that way. So the point we try to avoid both of those, not to leave peeled eggs or cracked eggs overnight, unless we, as you see here, leaving a bit of shell with it, which somehow ward off the ruach ra. So the answer to this question about this packet of garlic, unless there is some kind of, it's actually got star K, but I don't know what their hechsher, whether they in hechsher also deals with the ruach ra. As I said, some poskim say, since it's not memort in Shulchan Aruch, it's not so binding. So I'll call upon him. If they do add salt to it in the factory, then it would be okay. Otherwise, I wouldn't advise to use it. Okay. The next question which I have on my list was, is it okay to use post-it notes on Shabbos? So I was checking through an article on Chabad.org. It's a whole series on Lamates Malachas, and they've asked me to review it. It's one by one. So this past week, we're looking through the halachas of Teufer, which is stitching, sewing. So the isser to use glue, to glue things together, also comes under the av malacha of Teufer, like you use thread to hold two pieces of cloth together. So here you're using glue to hold, it's using a third body. You've got two bodies of, let's say, a cloth or paper, and you're using glue to hold them together. So it's like using thread to sew two pieces together. So you're not allowed to glue things together on Shabbos. But we do know that people do use, we've got a varied audience. If I say back in the day using the Pampers, some people don't remember those. They remember the cloth ones, the terry ones, the big safety pins. So, but somewhere in between the present and the ancient past, there was a period where the Pampers worked with stickers, with some kind of sticky surface, and so there it became a whole issue. Are you allowed to use them on Shabbos? Now, this goes back to a machloikus. This is brought in Shulchan Aruch. Are you allowed to separate something which was stuck only for temporary? And the story was that people would take their shoes to be repaired, or when the cobbler would make a pair of shoes. So before shoe boxes were invented, so the way to keep a pair of shoes together was to sew them together. All right, so on Friday I picked up a pair of shoes from the cobbler, and now on Shabbos morning I want to go to shul with those shoes, but it's rather inconvenient to walk with a pair of shoes which are sewn together. Clearly, though, that stitching was of temporary nature. So am I allowed to separate this? So some of the apostles say you're not allowed to. It's sewn together. You're not allowed to disconnect the stitching. Others say you are allowed to because it was done clearly for a temporary period. That's the shiur of Rabbeinu Yoel, brought in the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch. And the Alter Rebbe says you are allowed to. V'lo yasa kein b'fnei am ha'aretz. you shouldn't separate this in the presence of Am Ha'oretz, who will not necessarily know the difference between something which is long-term or short-term. So therefore we have a heter to separate something which was stuck for short-term. That's the basis of the heter with the pampers, etc. Even if there's a heter to unstick a short-term adhesion, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're allowed to make a short-term adhesion. So with the pampers, the psak was you are allowed to, because it's very much for short-term and it's removed after a few hours, etc. So what about post-it notes? Coming back. So there's an excellent series on Hilchos Shabbos called 39 Melachos by Reb David Ribiyat. And so I found that he actually addresses this, and he writes that you shouldn't use post-it notes. And although some people say I only use a post-it note only for very short term, some of us use post-it notes for a long time. And I can say for myself, some of my post-it notes can stay there for months, but that's because I never get around to dealing with them. But so post-it notes are not necessarily for short term. And so one shouldn't be using post-it notes on Shabbos. Now, here's an interesting thing. I noticed also, Rabbi Ribiyat, he writes that to remove a post-it note from the pad would be Iso Korea. Now, that was an interesting point, because Korea means when things were stuck together and you were disconnecting them. But according to what I just said, according to Rabbeinu Yoel, one could argue that the post-it pad is not made that it should stay stuck together, it's made that they should be separated. Therefore, there may be a heter on the level of Korea that wouldn't be Korea, because it was made lechatchila that it should be separated in due course. Others maintain that heter based upon the cobbler is it's mamash a very short-term adhesion. Let's say it was mamash just for 1 day or two, or even for 1 day. The Alter Rebbe is not clear whether it's talking about because of mamash a short-term. The question is, was it talking about a cobbler, or is it who repairs shoes, or talking about who makes shoes? Let's say if one who makes shoes possibly is going to stay together for longer. If it's just for repairing shoes, the likelihood is for a shorter term. All right, so bottom line is that one shouldn't be using post-it notes on Shabbos. But all right, yeah. Let's go on to the next slide, which we have here. So about tefillin. Now, on the right, we have here, this is from the Sefer Tamei HaMinhagim Makorei Hadinim. The original Mechaber his name was Sperling. But then the Rabbi Weinfeld of Yerushalayim, who was the owner of Eshko and subsequently formed another company called Shaila Moira. So he added diagrams. Zlobavitch is shaykhus to Chabad, Shtickle Mechutin also. So he added diagrams to the very popular Sefer Tamei HaMinhagim. He completely retypeset this. It's about 50 years ago or more. And so he included diagrams of how to make Chabad Kesher, the Four of Chanukah, etc. But this is generic Sfarad Minhag. So the Ashkenaz Kesher, if I'm not mistaken, is more like the squarish one, a double daled. And this is the Sfarad Kesher, which is more like a single daled. And as you see from the back, there's two ways. One is where the diagonal is in front of the vertical. And the other one is where the vertical is in front of a diagonal. Now, my understanding from Mishnah Berurah is, and I think also from the Avnei Nezer, that they're not happy about this type of kesher because it's too easy to adjust. It's too easy to open and close, and a kesher should be a kesher shel kayama. So, Rabbi Zirkin, Rabbi Eliezer Zirkin's son, the mayor lives in Florida, is son-in-law of the late Rabbi Zion, Hakanel Shalom. So he tells me that his father, when he checked the Rebbe's tefillin, the kesher was indeed like this. In other words, the way which the Mishnah Berurah is not so happy about, that's the way the Rebbe's kesher was. So I found that very interesting. And it's interesting how one thing leads to another. This week, someone sent me a question dealt with by Reb Shlomo Kluger. If a person is in prison, is allowed out of prison for 3 hours, sometime over Chanukah, should he go out for benching licht or should he go out for davening for saying Hallow? And Shlomo Kluger says he should go out for benching for Hallow. He holds that Hallow is more important than benching licht. I didn't have a chance to look up Shlomo Kluger's writing, but it's not Negea Lamaisa, just in Inyan. My first reaction would say that lighting Chanukah is more important than saying Hallel. And my logic is that when you say Hallel, it's your own inspiration. When you light the menorah, and it's especially if you put it by the window, so then it's reaching other people. So it's not only for yourself, it's for other people. Even at home, it's for your family. It's not just for one person. And so possibly something which is to be shared for others is more important than something which should be just for yourself. Now, looking at these two forms of the kesher, it's true that there's an advantage in the first kesher that it's more difficult to adjust it. It's therefore the kesher becomes a more permanent kesher. My question is, what will happen if someone borrows your tefillin? If it's easier to adjust, they will adjust it and wear the tefillin properly. If it's not easy to adjust, the likelihood is that they will wear the tefillin in a less than desirable, the less than perfect way. So there may be a svara to dafke, to have your kesher in a way that if someone else wears the tefillin, so to tiyelas harabim. For yourself, it might be more muhuder to have with a diagonal in front, but to be mazaka other people would be a mile to have it in a way that's easier for another person to adjust it. And of course, if they borrow your tefillin, they have to put it back the way they found it. That's without saying. I see there's a couple of chats. What about garlic powder as regards ruach ra? And then the response that surely garlic powder has been processed. Sure, I would say that it's not a piece of garlic. It's very much processed. I don't think that's a problem. I remember there was a need for some kind of hechsher on garlic powder, which I don't remember the detail. There may have been some kind of additional ingredient sometimes, and therefore it would require a hechsher. But not a problem with ruach ra. Okay, so we've been discussing a little bit about the tefillin a couple of weeks ago, and I was speaking with the boys in the yeshiva Ktana, and I mentioned about not wrapping the ritzua over the knot of the shalyad. So they asked me where did I take this from, and I thought it's written in Shulchan Aruch, and I looked and I saw that it was not there. I started looking around. At any rate, a couple of days later, one of the boys, I'm very impressed. They did their research and they came up with as a yechidus of someone called Zalmanov, Yisrael Yosef Zalmanov, who passed. His father was the famous Reb Shmuel Zalmanov, and when he was just before his bar mitzvah, he went into Tofshin Yud Aleph, I think, around then. He went into yechidus with his father, and as I say, he just passed away. The bar mitzvah boy just passed away recently, and there in that yechidus is reported that the Rebbe had said that when you wrap around the ritzuas, you shouldn't wrap around on the kesher shel rosh, but on the kesher shel yad, it's okay. Now, I have a sefer. I think I mentioned it. I mentioned it a couple of weeks ago of the minhagim of the Rebbe called Orches Menachem. There's a section about tefillin, so they talk about this, and they give a reference there to the following report. In Tofshin Zayin, in 1947, the Rebbe travels to Paris to greet his mother, who had just come out of Russia, and he was to accompany her to come with him to the United States. So whilst the Rebbe was there for a good few weeks, and there was Anash, there were quite a few of Anash in Paris at the time, and Rabbi Butman, who lives now in Tel Aviv, this is his memory of when he saw the Rebbe in Paris. So he writes the following. This was published in the Hiskashrus journal, number Tov Lamed Tes, I think. So he writes the following. In the year Tofshin Zayin, when the Rebbe was about to leave Paris on the way back to America with his mother, he brought his tefillin with him.
and it was the presence of my father, Reb Zalman Gutman, and also Reb Tal Vilshansky. I don't know whether it was planned, this meeting. And the Rebbe had a discussion with them about the upshartim, how do you do the shiur. The Chabad kesh is a special way of tightening it as you wear it. At any rate, I'm going to skip to the second paragraph. The kesher lekipul, in relation to the way to wrap up the tefillin. So the Rebbe showed these two gentlemen, these two chassidim, the Rebbe Rayatz, there's a story in the Gemara of someone who was in the time where they were not allowed to wear tefillin, and he did wear tefillin, and then there was some policemen saw him wearing tefillin. They gave chase, and meanwhile he managed to pull off the tefillin, and he was holding it in his hand. It's a very small tefillin, and they asked him, "What's in your hand?" And he said, "It's the wings of a dove." That's based upon a pasuk in Tehillim that the wings of a dove is like a protection. And he opened his hands, and lo and behold, there were wings of a dove. So there's a rebbe's here in the tefillin to the idea of kamfer yoina, and that's the reason why the minhag is to wrap the retzuos around the tefillin on either side, reminiscent of the wings of a dove, which are obviously on both sides of the dove. So there's a lot of discussion whether that is in between the shalosh and the shalyad, or both of them individually. There's different ways of learning this. So therefore, it was significant that the Rebbe explained to them and told them that the Rebbe, as in the Frierdiker Rebbe, does the wrapping of the retzuos, kekanfer yoino, also on the shalyad. But the shalyad, the kesher, hakesher shalyad, nisha michutz l'retzuos. But the kesher is outside. So the koloma ha'retzua kruch al ha'tirtura, the retzuah is wrapped around the ledge on the side of the tefillin, and the kesher is a little bit pulled out. Now, we went to the discussion the other day, was it last week or 2 weeks ago, that there's a strong emphasis in the Zohar that the kesher should not move away from the tefillin. However, that in itself is questionable whether the Zohar is referring only to when you're wearing the tefillin, or even when the tefillin are in the bag. So, and there are eminent poskim, kabbalim, who say even with the tefillin in the bag, the kesher should be touching. But it looks like the Rabbeim were not particular about that. And so when they wrapped up the tefillin, so he said to Frierdiker Rebbe, he'd pull the straps were mamish, hugging the side of the tefillin, and the kesher was a little bit outside. So basically what we're seeing here is contradictory reports. Some say that the Rebbe was particular, was saying that it doesn't matter if you wrap the tzua over the tefillin, over the kesher. And some say they would explain that it shouldn't be wrapped over the kesher. And either it's contradictory reports, or there were different times. So sometimes like this, or something like that. It could be that at different stages the hanhoga was a different way. Okay, let's go to the chat here. Someone's posted here something about spices and herbs. Thank you. Chaim Odds. Spices, herbs, and seasonings, pure, dry, both whole and ground are permitted. Those salts and spice and herbs and salts, e.g., garlic salt, may contain non-kosher stearic acid. Salts should only be purchased if they are rabbinically approved. Okay, yeah. So good. Thank you. Right. That's the 2 points about the tefillin. One was about the way the knots are made, and the other one about wrapping around the tefillin. So fine. So there are Messiahs one way, Messiahs the other way, and whichever way you do, live in Hashemayim. Okay, then I got a question, which is an important question, that now Baruch Hashem, an anti-COVID vaccine is being rolled out in the UK, and the priority is being given to the most vulnerable. So if a person was given a slot on Shabbos, would they be able to travel to the given place, the surgery, whatever it may be, to get vaccinated? And I think none of us will disagree that there is a issue of pikuach nefesh, of life saving. and exactly which method would be the right method. But I want to share with you a story. This story was shared, I have it in the Kfar Chabad in front of me. It's issue number 1885, and it's a report from that famous Krias HaTorah Zoom verbrengen. And this was told by Rabbi Mendel Gluchowski, who's a shliach of the Rebbe and the Rov of Chabad community in Rehovot. He says the following story. There's a Jew in his community, but then he tells the name, Elimelech Shachar, who is now a shliach. It's in Rehovot, whatever. He had some kind of blister of sorts on his tongue. It looked like some kind of growth, and it started growing, and everyone was very concerned. Rabbi Shachar went to a doctor, and the doctor said it's malignant, and you should have be operated to remove it before it grows more. Rabbi Shachar went to other experts, and the majority of them said the same thing. It needs to be operated on. But there was one of the experts who was also into homeopathy, etc., natural healing, and he said that this problem can be healed with tablets and some natural whatever. And he started taking these tablets, and the blisters, the growth continued to grow. Rabbi Gluchowski says, I asked him from time to time what's happening, and he said, well, the doctor says it's okay, and I should continue with the natural healing. One day, Mrs. Shachar calls me. He says, Kvod Rav, we have 12 children. My husband's situation is really putting me under a lot of pressure. His growth is growing more, and I'm very, very worried. The only one who he'll listen to is you, Rabbi, and it doesn't look okay. The conventional doctors say it's not okay and it's very dangerous, and we have to do something. So Rabbi Gluchowski continues. He says, I went and spoke to him. He said, listen, Rabbi, the natural doctors, so to speak, are saying that it's okay and nothing to worry about. But I know that the other doctors don't agree with that approach. So I think this Rabbi Gluchowski sat down and wrote to the Rebbe. He wrote to the Rebbe, asked with this dilemma. So the Rebbe answers him, La sois ka'atzas Rav poisik vosik be'eretz HaKodesh. To follow the counsel of a Rav who's a poisik, a veteran poisik in the Holy Land. I received this answer, and I was thinking, who is the most veteran, respected poisik in matters of medicine? Was clearly with Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who most of the hospitals in Eretz Yisrael, they would discuss the halacha issue with him, particularly Shari Tzedek, etc. So I arranged with Reb Chaim Shalom Deitch, and we made an appointment with Rav Auerbach to discuss. We went through the appointment, went to Shari Chesed, to where Reb Shlomo Zalman lived, went into his room. He was a very endearing type of person, like a nice Geschmack Zeder. And he was holding my hand the whole time in a very endearing way. He listened to the whole story. And I told him that I'd asked the Rebbe, and I guess this is the patient himself who went to Reb Shlomo Zalman. And the Rebbe said to ask a poisik vatik, to ask a veteran poisik. Reb Shlomo Zalman answers, "Das is a Rebske shaila. This is a shaila for a Rebbe." So fine. So I was a bit confused. So it looks like Gluchowski and Shachar were both by Reb Shlomo Zalman. Rabbi Shachar says, all right, fine, we've got the answer. The Rebbe told me to go to a posuk, and the posuk told us it's a question for a Rebbe. So it's a shaila for a Rebbe. So we went back to Rehovot. So I said to Rabbi Shachar, so we're going to have to write to the Rebbe, report back what Rabbi Auerbach said. If it's a Rebbe's questions, we have to ask the Rebbe again. All right. So we wrote to the Rebbe the whole thing. The Rebbe responded. I don't know whether the word impatient is the right word. The Rebbe writes, "Hareza hepech kavanossi." This is the opposite of my intention. Ani onisi ketzas posik bosik. I told you to go to get the counsel of a veteran posik. Why are you sending the shaila back to me? Okay, so I called up Rabbi Deitch. We made another meeting with Rabbi Abach. We met him, and he remembered us. I told him the Rebbe's answer, and the Rebbe didn't want that he should send it back to him. So Rabbi Auerbach says the following. Chassid bin ich nicht, aber am Misnagid erwarte nicht. I'm not a chassid, but I'm certainly not a misnagid. And if the Rebbe says I have to paskin, so I'll paskin. Then Rabbi Auerbach says the following. If we're dealing with pikuach nefesh, and there's a dispute between conventional medicine and unconventional medicine, the psak is that one has to follow the guidance of conventional medicine. The reason for this is because the most of the brains and most of the funds are invested in conventional medicine. And therefore, al pi Torah, when there's a question of pikuach nefesh, one has to go according to, if there's a dilemma, one has to follow the conventional medicine. Rav Auerbach added, if it's not pikuach nefesh and there are various options, then there are, the Eibishter has various ways to heal, and one doesn't necessarily have to follow the conventional route. So obviously, after this psak of Rav Auerbach, Rav Shachar did go through the conventional route, had an operation, and which was successful. Here it was he says it's a ma'aser moifus, a further development. 6 weeks after the operation, Rabbi Shachar went for further checkups, and the doctor said, well, after the operation, you should also have, radiotherapy, that the growth shouldn't come back. Although they lived in Rehovot, but the clinic where they visited was in Yerushalayim. So after the clinic, Rav Shachar decided to go to the coastal together with his wife to daven at the coastal. Bashgocha protest, to their surprise, at the coastal they meet Reb Shlomo Zalman. They approached him, they told him the situation, and that the doctor had said to do radiotherapy for extra safety. So Auerbach said, you don't need to have the radiotherapy, and everything's going to be outside Hayosatov. Rabbi Gluchovsky continues. Rabbi Levi Yitzchok Halperin heard the story. He was the head of the Halocho and Technology Institute, and he was very knowledgeable in refuah issue, Halocho and refuah stuff. So he says, even b'pikuach nefesh, if there would be a situation where the conventional medicine people have raised their hands in despair and they do not have a solution, then you are allowed to, and you should take counsel with the non-conventional, with the natural medicine people. So that's the story. So coming back to our shaila, so using the vaccine, which vaccine I'm not going to comment on because it's not my field. I don't know, but it certainly is a inyan of pikuach nefesh. And if a person does have an appointment, certainly to asking a goysha driver to take you to have the vaccine done would certainly be justified. We have one more question on our list, and that is, okay, the question is, someone's asking, using frozen chopped onions or minced garlic. I'm not sure, unless they've added salt, I would say you shouldn't be using it because it's not processed. But if it's chopped, I think there's a very big difference between a garlic powder, which has gone through some kind of drying process, which just chopped garlic. I don't think that's called processed. Okay, let's come back to the last question on our list. So the story is the following. Reuven has built a rear ground floor extension. His neighbor Shimon kindly allowed the party wall to be partly in his land, in Shimon's land. But Shimon says, I'm not interested in having the wall. It's okay, I'm allowing you to overstep the boundary line, but I don't have to pay for your wall. But years later, Shimon does extend his property and makes good use of the existing party wall. And now the question is Shimon obliged to pay his fair share of the party wall? Now, there is a concept in Halocha of Zeh nehene v'zeh lo ychose. If Reuven benefits, sorry, in this case, if Shimon benefits and it's no loss to Reuven, then Reuven can't really demand money because, I mean, the fact that I'm benefiting is not at your expense. So there is such an approach, but actually that doesn't carry true in this halacha. So we're going to learn a din in Shulchan Aruch in Choshen Mishpat, Siman Kuf Zayin. We'll give it a couple of minutes. So the Shulchan Aruch reads the following: Koisel ha-chotzer ha-mavdil beishnei shutfim. There's a party wall between two neighbors, obviously. Well, when he says shutfim, he obviously means shchenim. And the wall fell down. Yesh l'chol echad mehem lokef es chaveirei liv noisoi. Then each party can oblige the other one to join in the building costs ad goiva arba amas, to the height of 4 amas. So because it's a party wall, so then both of them have to contribute to the building costs. If one of the two parties built the wall more than 4 amas high, so obviously the more you build, the more it costs. I'm obliged to pay till 4 amas high. I don't know exactly what this means. And nowadays, if it's a garden wall, why do you need to have such a high wall? But that was the minig then, in the given circumstance. So up till 4 amas, I have to contribute. You wanted to build it 6 amas, 8 amas, leave me alone. I don't have to pay for those costs. However, if the neighbor builds a parallel wall on the other side, which is matching the height of the extra height of the party wall, so then he is obliged to contribute to the cost of which will be matching the height of the wall which is on his side. So, there's a party wall, and then the far side he built another wall, which is obviously indicating that he would like to at some stage put some beams across and create some kind of shelter by using the both walls. So Reuven is one side of the wall of the one neighbor, and he built a height of 10 amas. And the other neighbor built a wall parallel, somehow a wall which would be able to therefore benefit from the party wall. So he built his wall not 4 amas high, but 6 amas high. So he's obliged to contribute to the costs of 2 amas, 4 amas plus 2 amas. In other words, you have to contribute to the costs of the fair share of the first 6 amas. Because the fact he's now building another wall shows that he is keen to have benefit of the extra height. Even if he didn't build a parallel wall, but as the wall was built, the Shimon, he carves out niches to be able to put in beams, or somehow he attached a large horizontal beam, where the cross beams will sit along this horizontal beam. The fact that he's indicated that he has intention to make benefit of that party wall, the extra, he wasn't originally obliged, but in fact he's indicated that he's going to use it. He has to contribute. So he has to. Therefore, he has to b'sheish amas kulam shoyisv kavere ala arba amas afal pi shlebono kol hakoisul. Even if he hasn't built the entire wall. So say here, not only does he have to pay for 2 amas, he's made an indication he wants to make another whole floor. So he has to contribute his fair share for the entire height of the wall. This is from the Shulchan Aruch. The Rama adds, also, when you make a wall, and I don't know why Shimon was doing this, but when you have join 2 walls, you would want to have every second brick sticking out and in and out, so that they should be kind of teeth where the 2 walls should be able to marry, so to speak. So if Shimon does make his side of the wall in that way, so again, then the final part is what's most important to us. If the wall is already standing from a while ago, but now he built up something which is now indicative that he wishes to make benefit of that which was already built by the other one. So he says he has to pay towards it. So what we're seeing here is very clear, that even if at the time of the original, that's from the Ramah, even if at the time of the original building, Shimon could have acquitted himself from paying by saying, I don't need this wall, but if at a later stage he will benefit, he clearly is going to benefit, so then we look back and say, well, then you do have to pay your fair share of the wall. The question is a bit more intricate. Do we go according to the time when the wall was built, the original wall, party wall, or do we go according to the time of when Shimon built his extra wall? Because the costs may have changed from the time when the original wall was built until 10 years later when Shimon built and benefited from the party wall, which is an interesting question. And then there's also will be another question: if he's going to give more than the original cost, would there be an issue of ribis? All very interesting questions. And all I could say is that the best way, in any case, is a good recipe for peace with your neighbors, is the way of pshara, that you offer an amount and you say it may be a bit more, maybe a bit less, but if you are willing to accept this for settlement, then neither of them feels that they are, generally with pshara, that's the beauty of it, that neither of them feels that they won and the other one was totally wrong and I'm totally right. There's a compromise. Okay, you've got a point, I've got a point, and we'll come to some kind of settlement, and Bez Hashem Shalom Al Yisrael. So that's what I would advise. Someone is writing in the chat, normally the agreement to allow party wall using some of the land or the other, the agreement to, well, it looks like that the agreement was only to allow the use of the land and without any, are you saying that normally that would allow the costs? It looks like this wasn't the agreement, because there was a kind of a broigus between these neighbors for many years, and it turns out that this was the problem, that he had originally refused to pay, and now he then subsequently did use it without asking for permission to use it for free of charge, and so the answer is, yeah, he is mechuyev to pay. How much exactly they should work out, and should be Shalom Al Yisrael. I wish you all a good Tavoch and Didan Notzach. We should see Yadeinu Al Ha'alyono in Begashmis, Beruchnius, and as I said before, we should see also for Chaim Yisrael Ben Bluma should have a refuah shleima kroven. A good Tavoch.
Good Tavoch.
A good Tavoch.
A good Tavoch.
Tavoch, good Yom Tov Shpeich.